Welcome to BeFM Drama, where we turn great literature into gripping radio. My name is Joshua Cornwell, and I'm your host. Tonight we're bringing you Part 4 in our 5-part adaptation of The Five Orange Pips, a classic Sherlock Holmes mystery by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. In this episode, Holmes and Dr. Watson investigate the mysterious case of John Openshaw, a Sussex country gentleman whose uncle and father both died mysteriously, nearly 2 years apart, after receiving letters containing 5 orange pips and the sinister message, K.K.K, along with instructions to put the papers on the sundial. The messages seem to be connected to Colonel Elias Openshaw, the client's uncle and first to die, a man who made his fortune on slave labor in the American South and later served the slave-holding Confederacy in the American Civil War before fleeing to England. Now, John Openshaw himself has received a threatening letter with orange pips, and Holmes is rushing to save his life. Join me as Holmes reveals the meaning of a sinister acronym here on BeFM Drama. Sherlock Holmes closed his eyes and placed his elbows upon the arms of his chair, with his fingertips pressed together.
The ideal reasoner would, after being shown a single fact, deduce from it not only all the chain of events which led up to it, but also all the results that would follow from it. As an ornithologist could correctly describe a whole animal by the examination of a single bone, so the observer who has understood one link in a series of events should be able to accurately state all the other ones, both before and after.
Good enough in theory, Holmes, but can you demonstrate such an ability in this case?
To carry the art of analytical reasoning to its highest level, it is necessary that the reasoner utilize all the knowledge that's available. This requires, as you will surely understand, possession of all the relevant information, which, even in these days of free education encyclopedias, is often hard to come by. Do you remember when we first moved in together, how you wrote out a list of my strengths and weaknesses? You were trying to deduce what I did for a living, I believe.
I laughed at the memory of those early days. Yes. It was an unusual document. I ranked your knowledge of philosophy, astronomy, and politics at 0. Botany, variable. Geology, profound. At least as far as identifying the mud stains from any place within 50 miles of London was concerned. Chemistry, eccentric. Anatomy, unsystematic. Knowledge of sensational literature and crime, immense. Violin player, boxer, swordsman, lawyer, and self-poisoner by tobacco and other sources of abuse. Those, I think, were my main points of analysis. Holmes grinned at my list.
Well, I say now, as I said then, that a man should keep his little brain attic stocked only with the things that he is most likely to use, and the rest he can put away on the bookshelves of his library where he can get to it if he needs to. That's the case we find ourselves in tonight. We certainly need to use all of our resources, and so would you kindly hand me down the letter K of the American Encyclopedia that sits on the shelf beside you? Thank you. Now let us consider our situation and see what may be deduced from it.
Take me through your reasoning.
In the first place, we can start out with a strong assumption that Colonel Openshaw had some very good reason for leaving America. Men at his time of life do not change all their habits and willingly exchange the charming climate of Florida for the lonely life of an English provincial town. His extreme love of solitude in England suggests that he was in fear of someone or something, so we may assume that it was fear of someone or something which drove him from America. As to what he feared, we can only figure out that by considering the formidable letters that were received by himself and his successors. Did you notice the postmarks of those letters?
The first was from Pondicherry, the second from Dundee, and the third from London.
From East London. What do you deduce from that?
They are all seaports. That the writer was on board a ship?
Excellent. We already have a clue. There can be no doubt that the strong probability, is that the writer was on board of a ship. And now let us consider another point. In the case of Pondicherry, 7 weeks elapsed between the threat and its fulfillment. In Dundee, it was only some 3 or 4 days. Does that suggest anything?
A greater distance to travel.
But the letter also had a greater distance to come.
Then I do not see the point.
There is at least a presumption that the men are traveling by sailing ship. It looks as if they always sent their singular warning or token before them when starting upon their mission. You see how quickly the deed followed the sign when it came from Dundee. If they had come from Pondicherry in a steamer, they would have arrived almost as soon as their letter. But, as a matter of fact, 7 weeks elapsed. I think that those 7 weeks represented the difference between the mail boat which brought the letter and the sailing vessel which brought the writer.
It is possible.
More than that, it is probable. And now you see the deadly urgency of this new case, and why I urged young Openshaw to caution. The blow has always fallen at the end of the time which it would take the senders to travel the distance, but this one comes from London, and therefore we cannot count on any delay.
Good God! What can it mean, this relentless persecution?
The papers which Openshaw carried are obviously of vital importance to the person or persons in the sailing ship. I think that it is quite clear that there must be more than one of them. A single man could not have carried out 2 deaths in such a way to deceive a coroner's jury. There must have been several involved, and they must have been men of resources and determination. They mean to have their papers and care not who must be killed to get them. In this way, you see, K.K.K. ceases to be the initials of an individual and becomes the name of a society.
But of what society? Holmes bent forward and spoke to me in a suddenly lowered voice.
Have you never heard of the Ku Klux Klan?
Holmes opened the American Encyclopedia and paged through it until he found the entry he sought.
Oh, let's see here. K.K.K. Ku Klux Klan, a name derived from the fanciful resemblance to the sound produced by cocking a rifle. This terrible secret society was formed by some ex-Confederate soldiers and citizens in the southern states after the Civil War, and rapidly formed local branches in different parts of the country, notably in Tennessee, Louisiana, the Carolinas, Georgia, and Florida. Its power was used for political purposes, principally heinous terrorism against freed slaves and their supporters, along with the murder and persecution of any in the South who opposed their views. Its outrages were usually preceded by a warning sent to the target in some fantastic but generally recognized shape, a burning cross in some cases, a sprig of oak leaves, melon seeds, or orange pips in others. On receiving the signal, the victim must flee or face death, often inflicted in some obscene or sadistic fashion. So perfect was the organization of society and so systematic that there is hardly a case on record where any man succeeded in standing against them, or in which any of its crimes were traced back to the perpetrators. For some years the organization flourished in spite of the efforts of the United States government and of the better classes of people in the South. Eventually, in the year 1869, the movement rather suddenly suffered a major setback and seemed to collapse, although it has since re-emerged. What do you notice about this date, Watson?
Colonel Openshaw fled America around that time.
Exactly. Whatever internal struggle the Klan underwent in 1869 coincided with the disappearance of Openshaw from America with their papers. They may well have been related. It is no wonder that he and his family have these devils on their track. You can understand that the register and diary that the colonel kept may have implicated some of the most powerful men of the South of their involvement with the Klan, and that there are many who would kill to see it recovered.
Then, the page we have seen.
It is such as we might expect. It ran, if I remember, sent the pips to A, B, and C, that is, sent the warnings to them. There are successive entries that A and B cleared or left the country, and finally that C was visited with, I fear, the meaning that C was killed. I think, Doctor, that the only chance young Openshaw has in the meantime is to do what I have told him. There is nothing more to be said or done tonight, so hand me my violin. Let us try to forget for half an hour the miserable weather and the still more miserable evils of our fellow humanity.
The weather had cleared by the morning, and the sun was shining with a subdued brightness through the dim haze which hung over the great city. Sherlock Holmes was already at breakfast when I came down.
You will excuse me for not waiting for you. I have, I foresee, a very busy day before me in looking into this case of young Openshaw's.
What steps will you take?
That will very much depend on the outcome of my first inquiries. I may need to go down to Horsham after all.
You will not go there first?
No, I shall commence with the city. Just ring the bell and the maid will bring you up your coffee.
As I waited, I lifted the unopened newspaper from the table and looked it over. I paused on a headline which sent a chill to my heart. Holmes, you are too late. And so, we've come to the end of our 4th episode in our 5-part adaptation of The 5 Orange Pips here on BeFM Drama. Holmes has identified the likely murderers who have been terrorizing the Openshaw family as agents of the Ku Klux Klan, a heinous group of racists that emerged in the American South in the aftermath of the U.S. Civil War and remains active to this day, leaving behind a century and a half of evil in its wake. While the elder Colonel Elias Openshaw was a slaveholder, Confederate officer, and Ku Klux Klan member himself, and may be worthy of little sympathy over his murder, his young English nephew, John, is a relative innocent and has become collateral damage in the brutal internal politics of the Klan. Watson has just seen terrible news in the paper, but we'll have to wait until tomorrow to hear the conclusion of the mystery here on BeFM Drama.